Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Speak Plainly podcast, where we speak plainly about things that matter. I am your host, Owl Medicine, and in today's podcast, we're going to be talking about why I truly believe that the unexamined life is an act of violence. I totally understand how clickbaity that sounds, and there's a reason for that. Turns out that the podcasts that people listen to most tend to have the most clickbaity titles. But this is something that popped into my head a few weeks ago, and I realized totally summarizes a big portion of why I am who I am. So this whole concept of the unexamined life is an act of violence. It's a follow-up or a perturbation of, obviously, the unexamined life is not worth living, but then also is a perturbation of an unsolicited diagnosis is an act of violence. I love those phrases, and they're very, very true. When you're working in medicine, or, even astrology, or, anything where people are coming to you for more information than they have about themselves. Anything that you say can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So, if you tell somebody they have precancerous cells, then you never know how they're going to respond, and they could get really freaked out, and that stuff could become more cancerous. So, in medicine, I think it's a really good principle to keep in mind that an unsolicited diagnosis is an act of violence. I find that to be very true for myself in my life. It's a version of that in my head. The unexamined life is an act of violence. And the reason I say this is it's based on a few other little quips that we all know and that are true. One of the things that I really want to do in my life is to teach people critical thinking. School does a really good job of teaching us what to think and a terrible job of teaching us how to think. I fortunately had a father who, with all of his issues, did a phenomenal job of teaching me critical thinking. He really believed that I was going to come to the same end conclusions that he did using critical thinking, but I didn't, because we were starting off from different places. And he taught it to me in the realm of, biblical scholarship. So it didn't quite work out for him the way he expected, but it's the single thing that I'm the most grateful for that I got from him. I'm really thankful that I have this critical thinking ability. Using those critical thinking skills, it's really not difficult to come up with the unexamined life as an act of violence. And the reason I say this is in our modern world, there's another saying that we all have, and most of us believe, that says, hurt people, right? We know that phrase. We know that people who have been hurt other people. If somebody that you see at the store or walking past you or cutting you off, if they're furious, it probably had nothing to do with you, but they're angry, they're hurt, and so they don't care about hurting other people. And now that's in the moment kind of a cute situation. But it's true across the board. It's more obvious in acute situations, obviously, but it's just as real in less acute situations. What I mean by that is trauma. Trauma is ubiquitous in our world. I love Gabor Mate's new book, The Myth of Normal, and it's all about how we're all traumatized and that the modern world, the way that it's built in first world nations, America and Canada, North America, I guess. North America specifically, he's a Canadian clinician. In North America and most of the modern world, it is very difficult to raise a mentally and emotionally intact child. It's very easy to raise a physically intact child. We're really good at that. Medicine, Western medicine, traditional medicine, whatever you want to call it, like the normal medicine of the Western world, was built, it was designed to eliminate infectious diseases. And we have done a phenomenal job of that, of eliminating infectious diseases, to the point now where 8 out of 10 of the top 10 reasons that people die in the first world is because of chronic stress-related issues. The 2 exceptions of the 10 are trauma, like motor vehicle accidents or there's some kind of accident where somebody dies, and suicide. The other 8 out of the 10 all have to do with chronic inflammation and chronic stress. And that's the lowest grade version of what I'm talking about here. So the first principle to really look at to come up with this, the unexamined life as an act of violence, that first principle is that hurt people hurt people. That can happen acutely when somebody cuts you off in traffic, but it also happens through conditioning. We get conditioned neurologically from birth, and this is really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the way that we are conditioned from childhood to respond to things we think is fine, for the most part, because we don't know any other option. And that's all right. But if raising children in the modern world, pretty much no matter what, causes our children to be emotionally or psychically damaged, then they are going to emotionally and psychically damage other people. It's that simple. If hurt people, and we in the modern world are injured by the way that our society is structured, then if we live an unexamined life and we don't look inside to see what our conditioning is, what our programming is, and try to fix some of the worst bits of it, that is an act of violence, as far as I'm concerned. There is no reason that any of us shouldn't have a meditation practice, shouldn't have a mindfulness practice of some sort, to where you get the space, you grant yourself the time and the space to understand what it is like being you, experiencing whatever it is that you experience. Really paying attention to, oh, here's an emotion that comes up. What happens after that? Oh, here's a thought that comes up. What happens after that? Oh, here's a sensation that happened. What happens after that? And understanding how one thing leads to another is how we learn to understand ourselves. That is the examined life. We examine these different strings of if-then kind of questions, which is what physics is based on. It's if-then statements. So, to me, the unexamined life is an act of violence because in the modern world, we've all been damaged. We've all been hurt. And if we don't take the time to evaluate ourselves and how we respond to things, we're going to injure the people around us. And we're damn sure going to make sure that our children pick up the same bad habits that we have. That's the crux of this entire concept. I want to make sure people understand that I am not trying to badmouth anybody or to stand on a soapbox, but I feel really strongly about this. There are lots of other things that are equally as true that I'm not talking about today, but this is true, period. Whether you like it or not, whether it hurts your feelings or not, in the modern world, once you have heard this, you can't unlearn something, right? You can't unlearn it. You can't not have been exposed to something. And once you know better, your job is to do better. And given what we know about trauma and inherited trauma, healing ancestral lines, given what we know about how trauma affects the nervous system, and then how that nervous system creates a network to constantly keep our eyes out for things that confirm our bias, it is our job as adults, as conscious beings on this planet, to try to intervene on the behalf of peace, on the behalf of our children, on behalf of our children's children. The biological underpinning that is happening in this that I'm talking about is through development, the exposure to chronic stress prevents us from developing certain parts, certain regions, subregions, organelles of our brains and our nervous system well. There's issues with our vagus nerve. There's issues with our hippocampus. There's issues with the PHA axis. There's issues with the prefrontal cortex. There's lots of issues in lots of different parts of the brain because with the exposure of chronic stress, our body doesn't have the downtime to build up the pieces of us that we're supposed to be building up during these developmental windows. What that does is it creates what I have been calling people being chronic stress adapted. Now, chronic stress adapted goes across the board and includes things like ADHD and all the way up to borderline personality disorder and even bipolar and lots of other things. But again, I'm not a clinician. I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. These are what I notice, and that's why I use the term chronic stress adapted, because this is what I can prove in the literature while staying in my lane. So we become adapted to having chronic stress in our lives. We need a certain level of stress, and we will manufacture that stress in order to stay functional if we don't have it. Now, whatever the conditioning is that we had as a child, that creates certain beliefs in us. We get treated a certain way, and we come to adopt beliefs about ourselves and about the world around us according to our experience of the world. This is that concept I've talked about of adopt to adapt. In chronic stress adaptation with childhood trauma, we have to adapt to inappropriate circumstances. And we do that pretty appropriately. The way that we adapt to inappropriate circumstances is we adopt beliefs. We adopt these beliefs that become core beliefs about us, about the world, about goodness, about lots of things. But we adopt these beliefs. And those beliefs organize our thought and our life in a way that certain things are more important than others. And that's where it kicks in the RAS, or the reticular activating system. If you don't know what the RAS, or reticular activating system, is, it's a network in the brain that essentially filters out 99% of all the stuff happening around us. It filters out all the unimportant things. And I'm sure that you've had an experience of this. Most of us, all of us have, where you don't hear what's going on, but the second somebody calls your name, boop, you're right there. Suddenly you're paying attention, you can hear them, but before they said your name, you had no idea they were talking to you. That's because there's a handful of things that are important enough to always make it through the reticular activating system. Your name is one of them. If your partner wants to have sex, that's another one of them. A threat to your life is another one of them. If you perceive any of these things, even subconsciously, suddenly those things move into your consciousness immediately. That's the job of the reticular activating system. The reticular activating system will respond to whatever it finds to be important to you. You train your reticular activating system as adults. As kids, it was basically trained for us. We just had to kind of accept the world and our life and who we are according to the input of those around us. If you want to train your reticular activating system, you can do that really easily by walking outside, or even in your house. Just make a decision to try to find heart-shaped things in the world around you. At home, clouds in the sky, flowers, whatever. Just try to find rocks, heart-shaped things. And you'll notice, after a little while, they start popping up everywhere. You'll see all kinds of things that are heart-shaped that you never would have noticed before. That is the reticular activating system at work. It's the new car phenomenon. That is when you've never paid any attention to red Beamers, but then you bought one for yourself, and now suddenly it's important to you. So now you start to notice red BMWs everywhere. That's the reticular activating system at work. So it can be trained. If it's left untrained through the unexamined life, then you will continue to only let in things that you have been programmed by the world around you to deem to be important. And if you had a traumatic upbringing and some of those core beliefs about yourself and about the world are really negative, then guess what you're going to be looking for in the world? Guess what your reticular activating system is going to be pulling out? Out of all the things and the experiences that are happening around you, what your reticular activating system will be pulling out are the things that already confirm the biases that you have. RAS does confirmation bias like nobody's business because that is its job, like nobody's business. So by not examining your life and looking at what conditioning you have received throughout your life, you are letting what every person has told you up to that point and however you may have responded to it, you are letting that be your future forever. Every day, every decision is a chance for us to change. It's a chance for us to work toward being better, to accepting who we already are. Whatever changes you want to make in your life, every day you have that choice. And every day that you don't make that choice, that is the unexamined life. Another statistic to bring up in here is that every adult, if you've listened to many of these episodes, you've probably heard this before, every adult in a day makes about 30,000 decisions. 30,000 decisions in one day. How many decisions are you aware of that you made in one day? Just today. How many decisions are you aware of? Even if you're a very, very mindful person, I guarantee you're not aware of 30,000 of them. It's not efficient to be aware of all of them. But through examining ourselves, which comes through meditation practices and mindfulness, we can learn to observe when we're making decisions and the things that are influencing our decisions. And the more you learn about how subjective your decision-making process is, how subjective, maybe subjective is the wrong word, how easily influenced it is by your state, by your environment. When you recognize these things, like, you come to this conclusion, at least I've come to this conclusion that until the age of at least 30, because the prefrontal cortex isn't developed until early 30s, at least until the age of 30, for the most part, even at the age of 30 and above, without a meditation practice, I don't think free will exists. If you've ever read Behave from Robert Sapolsky, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. That book is phenomenal. It is a phenomenal book that encapsulates so much of what we know about behavior in neurobiology. And it looks at neurotransmitters and the things that are happening in the milliseconds and in the seconds before and in the minutes before and in the hours before and in the weeks to months before a moment that we're considering as like the event that is being studied. So much goes into those decisions, and almost all of it is situational. Almost none of it has anything to do with the character of the human being. It's the situations. It's the programming that we carry from our previous experiences that drives most of our decision making, pretty much all of our decision making, which is why I'm saying that without meditation, we pretty much don't have free will. It kind of seems like we do, and if we do, it's very, very hard to access. But without understanding all of these things that influence our decisions, we don't really have a good understanding of why we make the decisions that we make. And without that, how can you say that they're of your own volition? So for me, free will is a concept that comes in really powerfully here, because it's our free will. That's what's granted to us through the examined life. By living an examined life, we gain the ability to choose how we're going to respond to things, instead of letting our algorithms that live in our neurology make those decisions for us. And all of those algorithms are based upon previous experiences and our interpretations of previous experiences. Those algorithms will play out automatically the exact same way pretty much every time. And I don't want that to happen. Now, here's a caveat, an important caveat. This scales. This phenomena scales. The more trauma you experienced, the more examining you need to do, because the more trauma you experienced, the more damage you will do. And that's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. The experiences that you had, that I have had, programmed me to respond to things a certain way. But I don't always like that programming. In fact, I have spent most of my adult life learning to decondition and undo that programming. I've learned the hard way that it works better to have something else to program with instead of just trying to debug or deprogram it and then leave it empty. That doesn't work out very well. But you do have to do that deprogramming. At least I find I have to if I'm going to be happy with my own life, because I need to feel like I'm making my own decisions. And knowing what I know about neuroscience, I'm not making my own decisions unless I have a meditation practice, a mindfulness practice. And I'm not saying that you need to spend hours a day or even hours a week meditating. It doesn't take much. There's been studies done on this, and it really just takes 5 to 10 minutes a day. But if you do it every day, those things add up to a real difference in your ability to understand why you do the things you do, and you feel the way you feel, and you think the way that you think. Understanding those basic fundamental things about yourself is what the examined life is for. For me, I really truly believe in my heart of hearts that the unexamined life is an act of violence. This is reason number 2 why I wrote Rethinking Broken. I needed to write it for me, first off, so I could really dig through all of my life experiences with a fine-tooth comb and evaluate them and break them down and look at them from a bunch of different angles so I could understand it myself. But then all the data that we have about childhood adversity and the long-term effects of it are all pretty damning. Like, a lot of it, like, some stuff changes over time and does change naturally, including, like, borderline personality is good at dissolving on its own over time. But many of them don't. Many of the programs that we are imprinted with don't change. They don't dissolve. We have to be the ones to dissolve them ourselves. And this is what I think the job of all of us are, especially those of us who have been traumatized. That's why this is reason number 2, because the leader of the scientific inquiry into what happens to the developing brain is Harvard's Center for the Developing Child. And when you go to Harvard Center of the Developing Child and you look at, like, what they suggest for interventions and how we're going to make a difference and make an impact in childhood trauma, they say legislation is important. Agreed. But every single other step that they suggest are all about early intervention, which is great. I think that's wonderful. We do need early intervention. My problem is, who is intervening? Who is intervening on behalf of these children? Because we're all traumatized. And without living an examined life, and most parents become parents at such a young age, they haven't had a chance to examine their own life much. Early intervention is the only actionable step besides legislation, and they haven't even begun to be able to figure out a way to legislate anything that would have a positive impact. So if all we have is early intervention and the people who are intervening early are also damaged and broken, that is ancestral trauma. That is inherited trauma. That's what I believe that means. I don't think it's some woo-woo thing. I mean, it is to some degree, but I really believe that there are neurological, psychological substrates. There are biophysical analogs to all of these woo-woo concepts. And that's exactly what I see. Is ancestral trauma is the stuff that gets subconsciously passed from generation to generation. It's in our culture. It's in each of our culture. And I'm not just talking modern culture. I'm talking about your individual family's culture, your region's culture, your country's culture, modern, like first, second, third, fourth world, whatever. The things that we pass down to our children that we don't know that are being passed down, that are a result of traumatic instances, that is ancestral trauma. And I think it passes down that easily, that clearly. I really think it's that much of a simple correlation. I'm sure the analog is complex, and the way that it manifests is obviously infinitely complex. But that's what I think is meant by ancestral trauma, and the way that we undo that is we live an examined life. So how do we live an examined life? Well, I mentioned it earlier. It's through meditation. It's through mindfulness. It's through becoming aware of our own conditioning. And there are lots of ways to do this. But the best one that we all know about is meditation. There are spiritual practices, but every single spiritual practice is a variation of what could be called meditation. And meditation is the practice that we have that builds the skill of mindfulness. In the same way that reading is a skill that has unlocked an entire universe of knowledge and understanding. The whole reason that science is what it is today is because we have language and the ability to read and write. Mindfulness is the same kind of skill. It is a skill of being mindful and being present with our own experience and understanding where it comes from and where it's going. Understand its origination and its projection. That level of insight into our own selves is what we are lacking in the modern world, where we are so exteriorly obsessed. Developing mindfulness as a skill is the same thing as developing reading as a skill. We have kindergarten and first grade and second grade and third grade and fifth grade and high school and college level reading, right? We can say someone's reading at a sixth grade level or an eighth grade level or a 11th or 12th grade level or whatever. We don't have as descriptive of a strata for our ability or our skills in mindfulness, but hopefully we will. I don't think that it's all that necessary, or I don't think that it is fundamentally necessary, but I think it would be greatly beneficial to the Western mind. And in the same way that acupuncture, the reason it is so prolific is because it is a system of healing that adapts to the people in which it serves. The same thing is true of meditation and of mindfulness. And because it is now making its way really powerfully into the Western world, and we love to stratify things and to have quantitative numbers to match our qualitative experiences, I think that we probably will eventually have first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade reading level equivalents in mindfulness skills. But until then, it's hard to figure out where we're at. But staying with a mindfulness practice like meditation every single day, you feel the effects in the same way that when you start to read more complicated words as a child, you can get excited because you read hippopotamus without stumbling. You can put together words that maybe you haven't seen before and kind of understand a little bit about what it means due to the roots and the suffixes or the context, without actually knowing exactly what that word means because you haven't seen it before. I think that the same skills can be developed through meditation and mindfulness, but that skill set allows us a deeper understanding into ourselves. And that deeper understanding into ourselves translates into a deeper understanding for other people. And that is where we find empathy. That is where we learn to accept love. We have to first learn to love ourselves before we can love anybody else. We all know that trope. And this is where it comes from. If you can't understand why someone reacted the way that they reacted, it's hard. It's harder. But if you've known somebody for a really, really long time and you trust their process, you're better at accepting it without understanding it. If you don't know somebody that well, it's much harder to accept their responses when it's different from yours if you don't understand where it's coming from. But if through mindfulness and a meditation practice, you have come to understand how these things affect you, you can then do a little bit of positive projection and project onto them. I understand how I can be swayed by this, that, and the other, so maybe I'm missing something, or maybe it has nothing to do with me, or whatever. But that's how we access empathy. All of these wonderful things that we're all really in need of come through mindfulness and meditation. They come through the ability to understand ourselves well. And there's lots of ways to learn to understand ourselves. In fact, most of the woo-woo world is completely obsessed with them, myself included. I love astrology. I love like the big 5 personality tests and human design and tarot and all of these ways to divine certain information about yourself from some system. I love the Chinese medicine system. I love all of these systems that give me insight into myself. And so does everybody else. That's why there's such a huge push, like worldwide, for these things, especially in the first world countries, is we all want to understand ourselves, but sitting with ourselves is painful. So we would prefer to kind of have crutches in understanding ourselves. And that's what astrology is. It's a crutch. That's what human design is. It's a crutch. That's what all of those things are. They're systems that we can use to help us evaluate ourselves, and we use them as crutches because often mindfulness is too uncomfortable. Meditation is too uncomfortable. And I think they're great tools, and I don't think that you should throw them out just if you have a mindfulness practice. I think they all have their benefits, right? That's why I love them and use them on a regular basis. You can get certain insights from human design really quickly that you may not get from astrology, that you may not get from mindfulness, but if you stick with any of them long enough, you will come to a lot of the same conclusions. Much of the things that we find interesting in the modern world, in the modern first world, are things that teach us about ourselves, because we know so much about the outer world. We know so much about the world around us thanks to the internet. Anything that you want to know, you can Google. It may or may not be right, but you can Google it and you can find someone's opinion that you decide that you can trust, and then problem solved. But nobody knows you. You are the only mystery left in the world. Do you realize that? Do you realize that you are the only mystery genuinely left in the world? It's just you. The depths of space is still mysterious, but we have systems of exploration for that. The depths of the ocean are mysterious, but we have systems of exploration for that as well. And so we can guesstimate certain things about deep space. We can guesstimate certain things about the deepest parts of the ocean. But we have to guesstimate those things because we can't experience what it's like to be in the deepest parts of deep space. We just aren't there yet technologically. Same thing for the deepest parts of the ocean. We have some fantastic technology, but those things are kind of barred from us due to our limitations. But understanding yourself isn't nearly as limited. There is no PSI to deal with that is going to crush your physical body if you try to understand yourself too well. It feels like it. It can definitely feel like it. The pressure, that physical pressure, this adrenaline rush that we get when we try to understand ourselves, when we dive deeply into ourselves, is very real and it's very uncomfortable, but it's just a feeling. You're not going to instantly freeze like you would in deep space, or instantly be crushed into something the size of a pin because of the deep sea. You're just going to be left with your experience. And in those really uncomfortable moments, you'll be left with past experiences that haven't resolved themselves yet. And those unresolved past experiences, that's what hurts other people. That is the hurt that causes you, that causes me regularly to accidentally hurt the people I love and care about. And that's what I mean when I say the unexamined life is an act of violence. If hurt people hurt people, and we've all been injured by life because life's hard. Anybody who tells you otherwise is lying. Life is always hard. If for no other reason than life has always been hard, so it's in our biology to have an inescapable balance of both pleasure and pain. So life is hard. It hurts. And without examining ourselves and why we do the things that we do, why we think the way that we think, why we act the way that we act, why we handle stress the way that we handle stress, without knowing those things, we are causing harm. If not to other people, then to ourselves. And that's what I wanted to drive home today. I want to drive home this concept that the unexamined life is an act of violence. And if it's not violent to other people, it's violent to you. Because I guarantee there are things that still hurt you that happened in your past that you think you're mostly over or whatever, but when you sit real still, you try to meditate maybe, and those feelings of panic and anxiety come up, that stuff is there. It's always sitting there. It's just now in those moments your attention is on it. But through meditation, you find out that it's always been there, and then something can just come up into your field of attention and then go away. And some of those things keep coming back and coming back and coming back and coming back until we find a way to resolve them. And once we resolve them, problem solved. That is one less hurt that we carry, which means one less chance to accidentally hurt somebody else. Or ourselves, which might be the most important reason to understand that the unexamined life is an act of violence. That reticular activating system for people who have experienced trauma and survived it, it is constantly looking for the threat. It's constantly looking for the things to confirm the negative self-beliefs that we adopted by no choice of our own as developing humans. But we can change that. And I think that we have to. I think that we should anyway. Maybe we don't have to, unfortunately. Unfortunately, we don't have to. But for those of us with lots of damage, it does feel like we have to, because we don't want to cause the same harm that hurt us. And the first step is recognizing, for trauma survivors, that blaming ourselves is an act of violence against ourselves. Blaming ourselves every time something goes wrong is an act of violence against us. Thinking, oh, I should have done this, I should have fixed that, when it's not your fault, not your responsibility, that's an act of violence against you. So whether you want to prevent self-inflicting pain, or you want to prevent accidentally inflicting that pain on somebody else, you have to live an examined life, one way or another. Zen meditation, through pranayama, through stoicism, through whatever. You have to find a way to live an examined life, to take time out of your day to reflect on what it's like to live as you, to understand your inner workings as well as you understand the outer workings of the world. And when you can do that, to some degree, because there is no perfect, but when you can do that, that is when we attain free will. That is when you are your own master. And that is what I hope for all of us. So That's today's episode. The unexamined life is an act of violence. And the more trauma that we experienced, the more hurt that we carry. Trauma is the Greek word for wound. And the more trauma we experienced, the more pain comes from our wounds. The more hurt we have means we hurt other people, including ourselves. So, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. If you stuck around this long, thank you very much. If you like this episode, consider buying me a coffee or donate on Patreon. Thank you very much for listening. And remember, stay curious and stay uncomfortable.
You